Welcome to the Leading at the Next Level podcast with Dove Development Consulting, the show built to provide ongoing support for your leadership journey. My name is Wes Dove, and I have the distinct honor and privilege to welcome Crystal Farmer. Crystal is Vice President and Chief Operating Officer with Augusta Health, and I'll give you some background. Cindy and I met Crystal virtually about a year ago, and the first time we had interaction was through an interview for this Leading at the Next Level podcast, just like we're doing now, and it was really based around the Augusta Health partnership that we had for our 2025 Leadership Legacy Experience. And in that conversation, Cindy and I were just absolutely wowed by the things that Crystal said. We talked about her purpose for accepting leadership responsibility. We'll revisit that shortly. But in doing that, she shared some of the core values with Augusta Health. Now, just so happens that I was in the process then of writing the manuscript for the Values Advantage, and we'll come back to that too. But in that conversation, we heard things that we thought, dear God, if this is accurate, if she's not just blowing smoke, this is really cool. Now, we've unfortunately had the opportunity to see Augusta Health on a different level. And that's when I had to take Cindy to an emergency department visit back in late July of 2025. And fortunately, though, even though we didn't want to be in an emergency department, we got to see those core values in action. And it wasn't Crystal blowing smoke. It was 100% lived out. They didn't know us from Adam. And it was one of the coolest experiences, albeit still in an emergency department, that we got to have because we saw the walk match the talk. Crystal, you've got a great team. Talk a little bit about your professional background, your experience in the industry, and just clean up anything that I've probably butchered there in that introduction.
Sure, you didn't butcher anything. Actually, it made me sound a lot better. I have been in healthcare for over 30 years. I've been a nurse for about 28 years, and I started as a frontline nurse on a floor in a hospital and just worked my way up. For some reason, people kept thinking, I think she might need to be in leadership, and really gave me opportunities to go into leadership and take on different responsibilities. And so here I am as the chief operating officer, but started as a frontline nurse and just worked my way up. I never sought a title. I'm surprised every day that I see the name on outside my door when I come in.
Crystal, one of the things that I've said over and over, if people pursue leadership for the title and the money alone, they probably aren't the right person to be in that position.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying they're bad people, but it's a whole different level of responsibility and sometimes heartaches. Leadership is hard. And when I say leadership is hard, I never mean barking orders, cracking the whip, commanding people. I mean, being willing to invest and really impact people's lives. That's hard. It carries a heavy weight. And I don't know that there is enough money to do that ongoing over the long haul. Now, with that in mind, let's revisit that idea of purpose, because I'd love to hear and have the folks catching this that maybe didn't hear when we talked before, what that purpose has been for you to keep saying yes, because that leadership weight is really heavy at times.
Yeah, I think the last time that you asked me, I really had to think about it before, and because you just do the things. And sometimes when you stop to think about the purpose, it's even more meaningful to you. And so for me, it was really about removing barriers and making something or leaving something better than the way I found it. And so many times as I worked with leaders, particularly early in my career, and you look at leaders as problem solvers, but that's just a piece of what we do. It's really about removing barriers, improving the work environment, motivating people, being vulnerable with them. And so my whole purpose is to make it better than the way I found it.
That's so cool. It gives me tears at hearing that, because I think about one of the folks that you'll be on an executive panel with at the 2026 Leadership Legacy, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. His name's Jorge Velasco, and he's the CEO of a company called BR Printers. Cindy and I've gotten to know and work with him over the last 5 or 6 years really closely. And he talks about removing barriers. He talks about stewardship and some of the same things. So I'm excited for you to get to meet Jorge coming up soon too. Now, with the background that you've got and the years in that industry, the way you've climbed the ladder and you've made an increasingly significant impact at each different stage, and that purpose is a foundation. Talk a little bit about what you do professionally, but really who you focus on serving now, because it's wildly different than what you did when you were a frontline nurse and providing direct patient care.
It is very different, but at the same time, it's the same. I went into nursing because I want to make it better, and my focus is on people. And so what I do now as the chief operating officer, still at the hospital, is it's a little bit more behind the scenes. I can focus on something not working today, like an air conditioning broke, or I could be focusing on a patient in the OR and making sure that we had the equipment to do it, or I could be focused on something that at the front door and making sure that our patients can access services. So a lot more is behind the scenes, but what I do at the end of the day is still about people. So whether it's about our patients or about our team, it's still about people.
Well, and make no mistake, you have a direct impact on every person that comes through the door through what you do there. And I would go so far as to argue that you have a wider impact because you convey that with so many other people who touch people that will never meet or see you. And in our experience, I mentioned the doctors and the nurses that we interacted with in the ED and even the check in process, but down to the security guards, it was a different atmosphere. I mean, it was you don't expect personality and fun when you're coming through the check-in process and security, but it was very encouraging. It was heartwarming. It was welcoming. It was a cool process. And I would go so far as to say that top down conveys all the way through. Very nicely done, man.
I absolutely love being a nurse and the impact that you can make on a patient. But what I've learned coming into the chief operating officer role is the impact on the bigger organization and even more people. So as nurses, we take care of patients. We give them pain medicine and we make them better. But my working with our maintenance team, our facilities team, our environmental services, our security team, all the people behind the scenes has been even more of a blessing than nursing. People know about nursing, they see it on TV. It's all behind the scenes people that actually make this hospital work and focused on everybody and making them feel just as important as a nurse or a physician. I feel even more blessed in this role than I was even as a nurse.
Yeah, there's a lot behind the scenes. Cindy and I were in an event in Galveston, Texas a week ago today. We spoke for a group of oil and gas folks, and it was so cool to do what we did. That was a lot of fun. But one of the things that we enjoyed the most, because we host events here in the Shenandoah Valley, we loved watching all the attention to detail that the organization put into it. So that behind the scenes matters. And you never get the feedback on the good stuff. You only hear about the bad stuff. But if you're not doing everything right, nobody gets to experience the good stuff. Very nicely done, ma'am. And that really leads me to the next formal question that I'll toss out, and it ties into the idea that we'll talk deeper as we go forward. Talk about one of your core values and how you personally work to make sure that you model that daily. So those maintenance teams, the security teams, every one of the ones that you just mentioned, how they see that, they feel that in the interaction with you, so they know what it looks like in practice.
Now, my values are very aligned with the Augusta Health values, and one of those is patient and community centeredness. And it sounds very cliche as a hospital, but so for an example, for our environmental services team, it's a hard job, and it's more than cleaning a room or taking out the trash. And so, how do you make somebody that's doing that job day in and day out feel valued and that they are part of the team and they're just as important as the clinician? It's how we have that conversation with them. And so when I talk to an environmental service person, one of the things that I say is, you know what your real job is? You are preventing infection. That's why you're here. You are preventing infection. You are an infection preventionist. And that's how this matters. So when our patients come in the hospital, they're going to leave better off because they didn't get something here that they weren't supposed to get. And so it's really about taking what we do and explaining it in a way to our frontline folks or to anybody that's in the hospital exactly what they do to take care of the patient. So they're not giving a medication, but their job is so important and we could not do it without them.
That is a stellar example, Crystal. It really takes me to the beginning of part two of my Leading with Clear Purpose book and how few times I've seen folks really connect those dots, like you just said, of here's how what you're doing really impacts the people that we serve. Because so often we talk about big picture, we talk about mission and vision, but we don't talk about how that work. And I worked for a large manufacturing company for close to 20 years. I knew the mission statement. Matter of fact, I've got my old time card here on my desk in front of me as we have this conversation that had this 3 paragraph long thing. And Crystal, I didn't have much idea on how my work really connected to any of that. And you just did it in a few sentences for folks that they will never forget. They will never they will never underestimate the impact and the role that they play in that. Very well done.
And that's the most important piece, and it's the connection. So whether I am connecting with the patient more than giving them a pain medicine or connecting with one of our frontline folks to say how important their role is about that connection. It's also about something we don't talk about a lot. It's about being vulnerable. with our team members and telling stories. I tell the story about my mom being in the hospital. She was a burn patient. And so I remember the EVS folks there and how important their role is because she was very vulnerable to infection. And so much of what I do, I think about that time where she was in the hospital and I relate that back to everything. And so that means I have to be vulnerable and tell that story as well. And we really don't talk about that enough.
Yeah. And I mean, vulnerability is such a key piece in leadership. I remember 20 years ago hearing John Maxwell tell the story about doing some work with an organization where he talked about vulnerability, and the CEO pulls him aside at the break and says, John, can't do that. I've got to put up a strong front. I can't let people see my weaknesses. And John laughs at him and says, huh, they know your weaknesses. You admitting to them, you being vulnerable, just lets them know that you know too. And it sets them at ease.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
you mentioned, Crystal, that the organizational values for Augusta Health were so in line with yours. Talk about that a little bit and how those organizational values were so important to you. You shared it with me before, but maybe revisit why you felt led to, yep, this is the right organization to be a part of.
Now, before I even knew what the values were, when I walked into the building and I interviewed here, you could feel what they were before you could see them written on a wall. And so teamwork and centered, the thing, professionalism, all of those things you can see as you walk in. And I know we've talked about this before. It not only do we say what they are, but we live that every single day. And you can see it in the organization. And then we recognize it. I think that's the part where I think Augusta Health probably stands out a little bit more is not only do we say what they are, but then we recognize folks for living up to that value. And so for every single value, if you come into our cafeteria today, you will see a picture of one of our team members and the list of the value and what they represented that value for that quarter. And so we do recognitions every quarter at people who have lived that.
Yeah, and you talked about that in your segment of the real world examples chapter in the values advantage. So go on and explain that. That really ties into the next formal question. And while it asks more about something that you've done to have an impact on the community or industry, I'm going to make the case for talk about how that's really had an impact on your team, because recognizing the folks that exemplify those values has a tremendous impact on them individually, your workforce, but also the community they serve.
So I'll give another example of something that we had last year. And things happen all the time, every single day. I have a window in my office and I can see our values lived out at the front door every single day. But another example is so I mentioned teamwork. And over when we had the snowstorm a few weeks ago, I could see our facilities team. I mean, 24/7, they were making sure that that parking lot was clear so that patients could get in, so our team members could get in. And at the same time, they've got something broken in another building, and so they're splitting themselves, and that happens a lot. In fact, last year we had a flood in in our childcare center, and that was a big deal. A lot of our team members depend on childcare. And at the same time, we had another major system go down in the hospital. And our facilities team, they were awarded the teamwork along with EVS and another department for handling those things in such a great way that they worked together. They put the fires out per se, took care of the problem, and they did it together. And so we had a recognition just for teamwork that probably had 20 people. And we felt like it was important that we recognized it's not just part of their daily job. It is their daily job to fix things. What you don't expect is how well they do it together. And so that's one of our values.
Well, and recognized behavior gets repeated. Matter of fact, when we had the opportunity to be with your team in the professional development days last year, Cindy Young at the back of the room, and I'm sure it was done in every other room that was there, but we were in the room with Cindy. She had thank you cards that team members could take and go back and recognize their teams or their peers or their coworkers or whatever for living out those values. Now, we've borrowed that idea for one of the pieces that we're, as we build out the full values advantage framework and implementation module that we'll be launching nationally in the next several months. We're using some pieces of that. And we've tested it with some of the organizations. So I give you guys credit for really spurring that idea with us. And we've watched it in several organizations already and how much they've embraced it. Matter of fact, I'm doing it with a law enforcement agency next week and doing the same thing because the values are there, but we don't talk about them enough and how it really looks in practice. So thank you guys for living that out. That's a big deal.
I can tell you those thank you cards, if you don't mind me just telling you one little story. There's actually two related to that. Early in my career, I got a thank you card from our CEO at a hospital when I was a frontline nurse. And first of all, that he knew my name. And second, that a patient had written a letter about something that I had done for that patient. And when I received that, I still have that. And that was 25 years ago in my desk drawer. And what it does is remind me the power of recognition and the power of gratitude. And so a couple years ago, I wrote a thank you note to a nurse, and she came back to me and she said, "You know how the kids get A pluses on their papers?" And I said, "Yeah." She goes, "That letter that you wrote to me was my A plus, and I put it on my refrigerator so my kids could see what I do at work and how I get graded. And my kids read it and they understood what I do and why I do what I do." And so it is the power of gratitude.
Yeah, and it doesn't go one way. Both
Right.
of those examples were from a leader in the organization down, so to speak. 10 years ago, I wrote one to a mentor of mine, Crystal, and I watched him in tears. Now, this is a West Point grad, Gulf War veteran, Bronze Star recipient, man's man, just tough guy, right? He's hard charger, wide open guy. And I watched him in tears in front of about 125 people talking about the stupid thank you card that I gave him for saying, here's the impact you made in my life. And so the piece that I would add is it's equally important for if I'm being mentored, if I'm being led by someone that impacts, we need to tell them too, because that leadership's hard and it reinforces, okay, I am making a difference.
I agree, and it's not just at work, too, it's at home. When's the last time you wrote a thank you note to your spouse for something that they did? It is the power of gratitude and that recognition. It's very cheap to do, and the benefits are outweigh anything.
100%. Now, talk about in this question, I want you to tie your core values that have been so instrumental for you and how they've really influenced you to invest the ongoing time, energy, resources into being the best leader you can be for the team that depends on you.
I stay there's a couple core values. One of the ones that I've not mentioned before is accountability, and that really, to me, is I don't talk about it a lot. It's not one of those feel good values. But it's important to me because I hold myself accountable and I have to lead the way. And so in order for me to hold my team accountable for the things that they do, I have to hold myself accountable and I want them to hold me accountable. And that's one of the core values. Again, I don't talk a lot about, but it's not about getting in trouble. It's not about writing people up. It's about walking the walk and doing what you say you're going to do. And so that accountability is really a core for me.
So I'm going to build off of that, Crystal. Have you ever been, because I talk about it in one, I've got two chapters back to back in What's Killing Your Profitability. One talks about the importance of having high expectations for our teams, and the other talks about the importance of maintaining accountability. Have you ever been in a role where you wanted to work for someone who wasn't willing to be as accountable themselves as they expected you to be?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And over the years, it's one of the things that having high expectations and having a high sense of accountability is a good strength and an opportunity for me as well. In one way, it makes me perform because I need to meet my own expectations and I expect my team to try as hard to meet their expectations. On the other part of it, where it's an opportunity, and it took me a while to learn that this isn't always something great, is sometimes you have to meet people where they are. And just because you have high expectations does not mean that everybody can meet them, but it doesn't mean that they're bad. It doesn't mean that they're subpar or that you should give up on them. You have to meet them where they are. And I've learned that through years of experience of sometimes my expectations are too high. And I've got to dial it back a little bit and bring people up to where they are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it 100% does. And I'm just thinking through, hey, I always say when we're with groups, and we got an email yesterday from one of the folks we were with in Texas a week ago, and they said, hey, by the way, we're praying for Cindy because I always tell groups, pray for Cindy because she's got to put up with me all day, every day. And I say that because I don't drink, I haven't drank in 25 years, but I live by the hold my beer and watch this approach. And I'm wide open. What can I get done? It's what fuels me. But we have different paces. And if I hold her to the same standard, she's leaving me and I wouldn't blame her. So I've had to really work hard to, just because my expectations on me are this, it's not the same as I have for her. She's great. She's way better than me in so many different ways. It just looks different.
It looks different, and that's exactly where I've had to as you mature through leadership, you realize that someone doesn't want to do the job. It's just sometimes the values are different. What's important to me So, for example, as a nurse, I'll just give a silly example, having the four corners on the bed, military style. Four corners on the bed, making a bed in a hospital is very important to me, but it's not as important to another nurse. That really what's important is making sure that the patient's water pitcher is filled. Yeah, it's a silly example, but you have to make sure that you're aligned with those expectations and what's important.
Yeah, I just heard that through disc model human behavior. I heard a high level of C with you, and I heard a high level of S with the other nurse with, and all of it's okay. No, I'm so excited about this question. Again, I mentioned it earlier that you were one of the contributors to the real world advantage or real world examples chapter in the values advantage. You've gotten an early look at the idea of the values advantage, what we were putting together, what we're looking to build there. The event on June 12th, 2026, the 2026 Leadership Legacy Experience is going to be themed around that and really built intentionally to provide everybody that's there with the tools that they can immediately apply to build that framework into their organizations. Talk about what you feel like organizations can benefit from if they take it to heart and really live those values out for their teams.
What I appreciate about the work and working with you and Cindy, one, it's given me time to reflect and answer those questions before you ask me. But having this values work, it really forces you to be honest and define what those values are. And are you really living them or are you just saying it? It's made me take a really hard look at what I say versus what I do. Do the decisions that I make reflect that? Do the actions that I take and the things that I say, do they reflect those values? And so I think if I had to answer just one question, it's forced me to be honest. And I think our organization, it's forced us to be honest. Are we really reflecting what we say that we want to reflect?
I appreciate that very much. And Crystal, the reality is that's hard, but so is not doing it. It's harder long term if we don't do it. It's hard in the moment to live by it, but long term, we're going to pay the price. It's easier to pay it up front.
Well, the other thing is that it forces you to be honest, but then it also forces you to self reflect. So, what's the gap? If I say this is my value, but I'm not really doing things or saying things that reflect that, then is it really my value? And then I need to take another self assessment. And can I close that gap?
Oh, 100% accurate. Yeah. It's easy to put things on the wall. It's easy to put things in a handbook. It's harder to take that self-reflective look and really align with, is that what they really know me as? And if not, why do I have it on the wall?
Agree.
That takes guts.
Agree. And as you mature in leadership or mature in your career, or even as new careers, it's important to understand the values of the organization. And when you go into interview or you're going in because it's a business that you need something that they do, start paying attention to, are those just words on the wall? Are those just words on paper? You want to work somewhere that really reflects that. And I hope that Augusta Health does when people walk in the door. They don't have to read our values to feel them.
I can attest to that. That's 100% the experience we had as patients coming in the emergency department, as providers coming in with the professional development day. Every interaction we've had, we felt those values before we've seen them on the wall. I don't know what the words are per se, but I do know what they feel like when I experience them.
And that's what we want. And we have one value that's called, and we talked about this before, the Augusta way. It is really all of those values wrapped up into a role model of a person that is walking the walk, that talks the talk, and that is an example to the rest of the organization and our community about what it means to be a part of Augusta Health.
And I would go so far as to say that's why our daughter, who lives 75 miles away, has had her last two children at Augusta Health, as opposed to at the ones that are much, much closer that she could have chosen.
Well, great. Fantastic. I'm glad to hear that.
Yep. Now, here's my last formal question, and then I'm going to ask one that I want to be more spontaneous, and I'll give you some time to think through. But the last formal one is, and you've already alluded to it a little bit. Give me the advice that you would provide somebody that's aspiring in their career, and I'm going to be specific here, that wants to grow into a leadership role, not just management or supervision, but really wants to lead and have a positive impact on people.
Early in my career, I gave the advice to say yes to everything. And because it gives you that visibility, gets you closer to those leaders, it lets you work on projects. But I think as I have again matured and gotten to this level, what I would really say is stay close to the work that's meaningful and don't forget where you came from. And as you grow, and it's really important, particularly if you're leading people and you haven't done that job before, to stay close to it. So make rounds, understand what the concerns are, be really close to that work. Don't forget your purpose. And every day I think about, if I was a nurse here, if I was an AVS here, what would be most important to me today to make sure that I felt from the organization or that I was able to do? Stay close to the work. You will not go off your path if you're staying close to your work and to the people and to your purpose.
No, that's so cool. It told the story that Cindy and I've lived out. There for a long time, we said yes to everything. Today, we don't get to, but we have
Yeah.
to really intentionally look at everything we do and determine, is that really in line with who we can have the most impact on? And sometimes it's hard because there's things that we want to do that we know it's not the right thing.
Yeah. I think the other thing that I would tell people going into leadership is, everybody expects like the business aspect, that you can do a budget, that you can do a schedule, that no matter what your business is, that you can do the core skills of that business. What differentiate businesses, leaders, is your focus on people, whether it's your customers and your team. That is what differentiates. And so invest in people, your customers, your team. That is what's the difference when you walk into a place. It's the focus on people, whether it is or it isn't.
Yeah. At some point, Crystal, I'm going to write a book on there's no profit without people.
Correct.
Because, and whether you're a nonprofit, I've worked predominantly in the private sector, but the reality is we all have to make profit or we don't stay in business, regardless of how the business is structured for the IRS. But for my last question, I'll give you a second to talk about this or think about this as I share what's in the show notes and so on and so forth. But the last question I like to ask is, what have I not asked you in this conversation that you really want to make sure folks know about your team, yourself, or even the Augusta way? Now, as you think about that, I'll share in the show notes, I've added the Augusta Health website. It's not just wall dressing. It talks about who they are. It gives you a real perspective of the experience. I've added their LinkedIn page and I've added Crystal's as well. Now, I'm not encouraging you to flock Crystal and bombard her with messages, but I am encouraging you to get to know who she is, because she's an amazing reflection of what Augusta Health stands for. And we've been blessed to be able to develop the friendship with her and her team, to be able to share her with you and have her participate, easy for me to say, in some of the things that we're putting together. Now, Crystal, what do you think? What have I missed?
I think there's a key part, and you'll probably see a little bit about it on my LinkedIn page. It's easy to talk business and people, but we also don't talk about having fun at work. And the power of fun and bringing people together in a purpose. For example, we have a safety huddle every single morning. So the entire organization gets online and we talk about what's happened in the last 24 hours that's important and what's going to happen in the next 24 hours so that we can stay aligned. Last week was my turn to run safety huddle for the week. It's a 15-minute meeting. And so I started the meeting with, okay, put in the chat box your favorite dad joke, just your dad joke of the day. It had zero business purpose. It had nothing to do with what folks were going to do today. But for just 2 minutes, when people read the dad jokes that people were saying, it brought us together. It connected us. It started the day out in a positive note. And so we all have business goals that we have to meet. We all have things that we have to do throughout the day. But don't forget to have fun.
Absolutely love it. Absolutely love it. I'm thinking through, again, I look at so many things through the lens of DISC. And as a high D, I'm thinking that's not getting the results I need.
Yes,
It is connecting me to the people that have different needs than I do. And therefore, I get to get the results that I need.
it is the same as a D. Then, when you write a text, you'll probably say, come see me in my office. And the person that's reading it says, oh my gosh, am I in trouble? So for me, and I had to learn this too, especially from a millennial. And I said, hey, when you have time, come by, stop by my office. And it really meant something good. And so she came to me and said, do you mind adding an emoji to the end? If it's good, just add a smiley face. And so again, it's not about my needs, it's about the needs of my people. And so I have never forgotten that. And so I said, hey, when you get a chance, wink, come by my office. I have something to tell you.
I'm laughing because almost every text, almost every email I send, I've got to move the cursor back to the beginning and say, hope you're doing great.
I do
Because
too.
it's so boom, let's get to the point. I'm thinking, I'm alienating people. Wow. Crystal, thank you for taking the time to do this. I could go on for days. I love each conversation we've had that Cindy and I've got to interact with you. It's made us feel like more of a connection with you and the team at Augusta Health. We appreciate what you do for the community, but just as importantly, we appreciate the relationship we've been able to develop with you guys.
Well,
Anything else
I
you'd like to add?
no, I appreciate you guys. I appreciate the opportunity to really talk about leadership. It's my passion, and I can't thank you guys enough for this platform.
It's meaningful to have those relationships. Good people make me stronger, and it's what gets me out of bed every single day. How can I be the best I can for the people that count on us even a little bit? Thanks for taking the time to do this. If you've caught this on our Leading at the Next Level podcast on one of the platforms where it's just audio, typically without my technical issues that I throw at Crystal yet again, these would the live recordings or the live videos and the recordings would be over in our Leading at the Next Level community on our platform. That's no cost. You can see in the show notes how to get access to that. If you're catching it on the audio, or regardless of how you're accessing this, if you've got a need for continuing education credits specifically through the HR community, SHRM and HRCI, reach out to me at admin@dove-development.net, and I'm happy to hook you up with a 7-day free trial. Kick the tires on one of our monthly platforms. The Next Level Access is where the continuing education credit lives, but there's some less expensive or really low cost, if you will. None are expensive but access options in there. And either way, we'll get you a 20-25% discount, something like that, to if you want to do it on an ongoing basis. So I hope this serves you well. Crystal, thanks again for taking the time to do this. We appreciate what you do for the community through Augusta Health. We look forward to seeing you soon. God bless.